My sister stole $4,000 of my kids' Christmas money, so I sent her to jail and then… Life as a single mom isn't glamorous, but I've made it work. I have 3 kids, Matthew, 11, Ellie, 8, and Sophie, 5, and every decision I make is with them in mind. We live in a modest house in a small town in Georgia, just outside of Macon. It's not much, but it's ours. Between working nights at the local hotel as a receptionist and mornings cleaning offices, I've managed to scrape by. For months, I'd been putting away every spare dollar for Christmas. I wanted to give my kids a magical holiday, complete with a tree full of presents. It wasn't just about the gifts. It was about making memories and showing them that even when things are hard, there's room for joy. Then Bethany showed up. Bethany is my younger sister, though you'd never guess we were related. Where I've spent years trying to build something stable for my family, Bethany has spent her life chasing chaos. At 28, she's always seemed stuck in her early 20s, carefree and careless. We hadn't spoken much in the past year, and honestly, I liked it that way. I'll never forget that evening. It was a Thursday, and I had just finished a long double shift. I came home exhausted, dreaming of the bath I planned to take after tucking the kids into bed. As I approached the front door, I saw her. Bethany stood there, her 4-year-old son, Mason, on her hip, looking defeated. She had a single suitcase next to her and a desperate look in her eyes. "Dana," she said, her voice cracking. I didn't know where else to go. I should have closed the door. I should have told her that I didn't have room in my life for her drama. But how do you say no when your little sister is standing there, tears streaming down her face, holding her kid like he's the last thing keeping her tethered to the world? I sighed. "What happened, Beth?" She launched into her story. She'd been evicted from her apartment in Savannah after falling months behind on rent. She lost her job at a retail store. Beth's stories always involve someone else being to blame. Her landlord, her boss, the system, never her. She had no savings, no plan, and nowhere else to turn. "I just need a place to stay until I can get back on my feet," she pleaded. "Please, Dana. I'll help around the house. I'll even get a job. I promise." I looked at Mason, who was half asleep on her shoulder. He didn't ask to be part of this. It wasn't his fault his mom couldn't get her life together. Against every instinct screaming at me to say no, I stepped aside and let them in. The first week wasn't as bad as I'd expected. My house isn't big. Matthew and Ellie already share a room, and Sophie has a small space I turned into a bedroom for her. That meant Bethany and Mason were stuck in the living room, sleeping on an air mattress. At first, Bethany seemed determined to make good on her promise to help out. She washed dishes a couple of times, threw out the trash once, and even helped fold laundry one night. Mason, bless his little heart, was surprisingly well-behaved for a kid his age. For a brief moment, I thought maybe this could work. But Bethany has always been like a storm, quiet at first, then destructive when you least expect it. 2 weeks in, her habits started to show. She spent most of her time on her phone or watching TV while I was out working. I'd come home to find my kids eating cereal for dinner because Bethany was too tired to cook anything. The living room, once the heart of our home, now felt like a war zone. Clothes everywhere, Mason's toys scattered, empty soda cans piling up. I tried to let it slide. I reminded myself that she was going through a rough time. But then Ryan entered the picture. Ryan was Bethany's boyfriend. I'd only met him once before when she brought him to a family barbecue a couple of years ago. Back then, I knew he was trouble. A smooth-talking, jobless man who thought he was charming when really, he was just loud and entitled. One afternoon, I came home early from work and found him on my couch, feet up on my coffee table, eating a bag of chips while Mason played on the floor. I was stunned. "Who are you?" Matthew asked me later that evening, watching me stew in silence. "I thought this was your house." It wasn't just that Ryan was there. It was the way he acted, like he owned the place. He barely looked up when I walked in. Bethany, sitting next to him, barely acknowledged me. I waited until the kids were in bed before I confronted her. "Beth, I don't want Ryan here," I said firmly. "He doesn't live here, and I don't need another person taking up space in my house." She sighed, rolling her eyes like a teenager caught breaking curfew. "He's just here to see Mason." He's not bothering anyone. He's bothering me. I shot back. And if you want to stay here, you need to respect that. She apologized, half-heartedly, and promised it wouldn't happen again. It happened again the next day, and the day after that. By the third week, I started noticing things out of place. A necklace my daughter, Ellie, loved to borrow disappeared. A bottle of wine I'd been saving for Christmas dinner was suddenly empty. My hairbrush wasn't where I'd left it. At first, I thought I was imagining things. Between work and the stress of having Bethany and Ryan around, maybe I was just being forgetful. But then I found the lid to my jewelry box sitting ajar. I always keep it closed, part habit, part paranoia. Something wasn't right. Bethany brushed off my concerns when I brought it up. Maybe one of the kids got curious, she said with a shrug. Kids get into stuff, you know? But I knew it wasn't my kids. Matthew and Ellie are old enough to know better, and Sophie is scared stiff of my mom voice. That left one other possibility, Bethany. I hated feeling suspicious of my own sister, but her track record didn't exactly inspire trust. Still, accusing her without proof felt wrong. I decided to keep my cool and observe, hoping I was wrong. But deep down, I knew. Bethany had always been the storm in my life. And now, the wind was picking up. A few days after I started noticing things going missing, Ryan became more of a fixture in my home than I could tolerate. I'd come back from an 8-hour shift to find him lounging on my couch, Mason sprawled on the floor playing with toys, and Bethany scrolling through her phone like she didn't have a care in the world. It wasn't just the presence of Ryan that grated on me. It was the attitude. He acted like he belonged there. He left dirty plates on the coffee table, hogged the remote, and even had the audacity to help himself to food from my fridge. The final straw came one evening when I walked in, carrying groceries, and he barely moved to let me through the door. "Ryan," I said, trying to keep my tone steady. "I've asked you not to hang out here. I need my space." He smirked, one of those smug, infuriating grins that made my blood boil. "I'm just here for Mason." Beth said it's fine. "No," I said firmly, setting the grocery bags on the counter. "It's not fine. You don't live here, and I don't want you here when I'm not home." Bethany appeared from the hallway, looking irritated. "Dana, it's not a big deal. He's not bothering anyone." "Beth, this is my house. You don't get to decide what's a big deal. I've been more than patient, but this is where I draw the line." She rolled her eyes. "Fine. Whatever." It wasn't fine, and it wasn't whatever. Ryan didn't leave. If anything, he started showing up even more frequently. The tension in the house grew unbearable. My kids started complaining about the mess, the noise, and the constant interruptions to their routines. Matthew, always observant, pulled me aside one evening after dinner. "Mom," he whispered, glancing toward the living room where Ryan and Bethany were laughing loudly. "Why is he always here?" I didn't have a good answer. A week later, I came home from a particularly grueling shift to find the house in chaos. The living room was littered with empty takeout containers. Sophie's favorite blanket was on the floor with a mysterious stain, and Mason was crying loudly while Bethany and Ryan argued in the kitchen. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice rising above the noise. Bethany turned to me, her face flushed with frustration. "He's just cranky. Kids are like that. I wasn't buying it." Mason looked scared, and the energy in the house was suffocating. "Ryan," I said, "my patience gone. Get out. Now." He smirked, but I wasn't backing down. "I'm serious. Leave." "Dana," Bethany started, stepping in front of him. "You're overreacting." "No, I'm not. I've asked you both to respect my space, and you've done the opposite." "Ryan, get out or I'm calling the cops." Ryan finally stood, muttering something under his breath, and walked out. Bethany followed him to the door, her expression a mix of anger and embarrassment. That night, I barely slept. The house was quiet again, but I knew this wasn't over. The next morning, I decided to check my closet. The unease I'd been feeling lately had grown unbearable, and I needed to know if I was just being paranoid. I opened the door and immediately noticed something was off. The cash I'd been saving for Christmas, over $4,000 I had hidden in a fabric bag tucked behind a stack of old purses, was still there, but the bag looked like it had been moved. I froze. I checked the rest of the closet and found other items out of place. A necklace I hadn't worn in months, a few receipts that had been crumpled instead of neatly folded. My stomach turned. It wasn't paranoia. That evening, I confronted Bethany again. "Have you been in my room?" I asked as casually as I could manage. She looked up from her phone, her expression blank. "No. Why would I?" "Things have been moved around," I said, watching her closely. "And some stuff is missing." She shrugged. "Maybe one of the kids went in there." You know how curious they get. My jaw tightened. I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was lying. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I ordered a small security camera online. It wasn't expensive, but it would do the job. I decided I'd had enough of feeling unsure in my own home. The camera arrived 2 days later, and I wasted no time setting it up. I hid it on a shelf, angled toward my dresser and closet. I didn't tell anyone. Not the kids, not Bethany, and certainly not Ryan. The first couple of days, nothing happened. Bethany and Ryan seemed to sense my growing frustration and kept to themselves more than usual. But on the fourth day, I came home and noticed my bedroom door slightly ajar. I locked that door every day before leaving for work. My heart raced as I checked the footage. There she was. Bethany, plain as day, walking into my room around noon. She went straight to my dresser, opening drawers and rifling through my jewelry box. My chest tightened as I watched her movements. She wasn't just snooping. She was searching for something. The next clip was worse. Ryan, the next day, casually walked into my room like he owned it. He spent nearly 20 minutes digging through my closet, pulling out handbags, and even pausing to admire a pair of shoes before tossing them aside. I felt sick. This wasn't just disrespect. This was betrayal. I checked the footage every day after that, and each time, my anger grew. Bethany and Ryan were in my room more often than I'd imagined, sometimes together, laughing and joking as they rummaged through my things. Then it happened. I came home one evening and went straight to my bedroom. My heart stopped when I saw my closet door wide open and the fabric bag missing. I dropped everything and checked the camera. The footage showed Bethany and Ryan entering my room earlier that day. They tore through my closet like wild animals until Bethany pulled out the bag. She opened it, looked inside, and pocketed the cash. Over $4,000. Gone. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the screen in disbelief. The footage of Bethany pocketing my kids' Christmas money burned in my mind. I had worked so hard for that money. Late nights, extra shifts, skipped meals, just to give my kids a holiday worth remembering. And she took it, just like that, as if she were entitled to it. I rewound the footage and watched it again, this time focusing on Ryan. He didn't even hesitate as he pulled out my handbags, rifled through them like he was shopping in a department store. The arrogance, the entitlement, it was too much. I was furious, but more than that, I felt betrayed. Bethany wasn't just my sister. She was someone I had tried to help, despite everything. I had given her a place to stay when she had nowhere else to go, shared my home and resources, even disrupted my kids' lives to make room for her and Mason. And this was how she repaid me. I wanted to confront her immediately, to scream and demand answers, but I knew better. Bethany was a master manipulator. If I confronted her without a plan, she'd twist everything, cry crocodile tears, and somehow make me the villain. No, I needed to be smart about this. I needed to be prepared. That evening, Bethany and Ryan strolled into the house like nothing was wrong. Ryan went straight to the fridge, grabbing a beer, while Bethany plopped onto the couch with her phone. Mason trailed behind her, quietly clutching a toy truck. "Where's my money?" I said, stepping into the living room and crossing my arms. Bethany froze, her eyes darting to Ryan. "What money?" she asked, feigning confusion. "Don't play dumb," I snapped. "The $4,000 I've been saving for Christmas. The money you stole from my closet today. I have it all on camera, Bethany. Don't even try to lie." Her face went pale, and Ryan shifted uncomfortably. He set the beer on the counter, his bravado melting away. "I don't know what you're talking about," Bethany stammered. "Maybe you misplaced it." "Misplaced it?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You think I misplaced $4,000? Don't insult my intelligence, Bethany. I saw the footage. You and Ryan were in my room, going through my things. You took the money. That's when the waterworks started. Bethany covered her face with her hands and began to sob. I didn't have a choice, she cried. I needed it for Mason. I didn't know what else to do. Don't you dare drag Mason into this, I said, my voice cold. You didn't take that money for him. You took it for yourself. Ryan, trying to regain his composure, stepped forward. Look, Dana, you don't have to talk to her like that, he said, puffing out his chest. It's not what you think. Shut up, Ryan, I snapped, pointing at him. You don't get to talk to me at all. You don't pay rent. You don't contribute. You're not welcome here. Unless you're about to hand me $4,000, I suggest you stay quiet. He opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off. Where's my money? I demanded again, turning back to Bethany. She hesitated, tears streaming down her face. We don't have it anymore, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. What do you mean you don't have it? I asked, my anger boiling over. What did you do with it? Bethany's voice cracked as she answered. We spent it. On food, gas, and other stuff. You spent $4,000 in one day? I shouted. On what? Fast food and junk? She nodded, unable to meet my eyes. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. You have until the end of the day to figure out how to pay me back, I said, my voice trembling with rage. If you don't, I'm calling the cops. Bethany fell to her knees, sobbing. Please, Dana, she begged. Don't do this. I'll find a way to pay you back, I promise. You've already made your promises, I said, and you've broken every single one. Bethany and Ryan disappeared shortly after that, leaving Mason behind. I sat in the quiet house, my anger giving way to exhaustion. I couldn't believe it had come to this. My own sister had stolen from me, lied to me, and now left me to clean up the mess she'd created. The next morning, I checked my phone to find a string of missed calls from Bethany. I ignored them at first, but eventually I answered. Dana, she said, her voice small and shaky. Please don't call the cops. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. It's too late, Bethany, I said firmly. You've crossed too many lines. You need to face the consequences of your actions. But Mason, she started. Mason will be fine, I interrupted. He's safe here, and I'll make sure he's taken care of. You should have thought about him before you stole from me. She began to sob again, but I hung up before she could drag me into another guilt trip. That evening, I made the call. The police arrived within the hour, and I handed over the footage along with a detailed report. The officers were professional but sympathetic, assuring me they would do everything they could to track down Bethany and Ryan. When they left, I sat in my living room, staring at the Christmas tree I'd put up for the kids. The presents I'd planned to buy with that money were gone, but I still had my kids, and I still had my home. Bethany might have taken from me, but she hadn't taken everything. The storm was far from over, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was regaining control. 2 days passed after I filed the police report, and Bethany and Ryan were nowhere to be found. It wasn't surprising. They'd always been the type to run when things got tough. The officers told me they'd issued a warrant for Bethany's arrest, and I'd provided them with Ryan's full name and any details I knew about him. All I could do now was wait. The house was quieter without them, but the tension still lingered. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach twisted, wondering if it would be Bethany with another desperate excuse or a call from the police. I tried to keep things normal for the kids, focusing on their school routines and trying to figure out how I'd salvage Christmas without the money I'd saved. The betrayal cut deep, but I was determined to move forward, even if it felt like I was walking through quicksand. On the third morning, just as I was starting to feel a small sense of calm, there was a knock at the door. I froze. A glance at the clock told me it was just after 10. Too early for a casual visitor, and I wasn't expecting anyone. My heart raced as I approached the door and peeked through the window. It was Bethany. She stood there on my porch, shifting her weight from foot to foot, looking nervous and out of place. My blood boiled. After everything she had done, stealing my money, lying to my face, and then vanishing, she had the audacity to come back here. I opened the door, and before I could think, I said, "What the hell are you doing here?" Bethany flinched at the anger in my voice. "Dana, please," she started, her voice shaky. I just want to talk. No, I said sharply, stepping outside and closing the door behind me. We're not talking. Not after what you did. She looked down, her hands wringing nervously. I didn't mean for things to go this far, she said. I was desperate. Desperate? I shot back, my voice rising. You stole from me, Bethany. From your own sister. And not just from me, from my kids. Do you have any idea what you've done? She opened her mouth to respond, but I wasn't finished. You didn't just take money, I continued. You took the Christmas I've been working so hard to give them. You betrayed me, Beth. You destroyed the trust one had in you. I can make it right, she said, tears welling up in her eyes. I'll pay you back, I swear. Pay me back with what? I asked, crossing my arms. You don't have a job. You don't even have a place to stay. And don't tell me you'll borrow it, because nobody in their right mind would loan you a dime after what you've done. Her tears spilled over, and she started to sob. I don't know what to do, Dana, she cried. Ryan said he'd help, but now he's angry with me and I. Don't you dare blame Ryan for this, I snapped. You made a choice, Bethany. You went into my room. You took my money. And now you're dealing with the consequences. Her sobbing grew louder, and for a moment, I felt a pang of pity. But then I remembered the footage of her and Ryan rummaging through my things, laughing as they pocketed my savings. The pity vanished, replaced by cold resolve. You need to leave, I said, stepping back toward the door. The police are looking for you. If you're smart, you'll turn yourself in and take responsibility for what you've done. Her expression shifted in an instant, the tears drying up as anger took their place. You're really going to do this to me? She demanded. Your own sister? What about Mason? What about family? Family, I repeated, my voice steady but laced with fury. Family doesn't steal from each other, Bethany. Family doesn't lie and manipulate. You're not acting like family. You're acting like a leech. Her face crumpled again, but I wasn't moved. Leave, I said firmly. Now. Bethany didn't leave. Instead, she stood there on my porch, her arms crossed, as if she was daring me to back down. I stayed firm, staring her down until she finally broke the silence. Fine, she said bitterly. But you should know. I wasn't looking for your money. I froze. What are you talking about? I demanded. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. Ryan wanted your gun. The air seemed to leave my lungs. My gun? I repeated, horrified. Why? She shifted uncomfortably. He said we could use it to, scare my old boss. To get my job back. I stared at her, struggling to process what I was hearing. Are you kidding me, Bethany? You were going to use my gun to threaten someone? It wasn't my idea, she cried. Ryan said it was the only way to make things right. I shook my head, disbelief and anger warring inside me. You are unbelievable, I said. You let that man convince you to steal from me and then plan something that could have gotten you both arrested, or worse. Do you even realize how reckless and dangerous that is? She didn't respond, just stared at the ground, her shoulders hunched in defeat. And for what? I pressed. What did you even get fired for in the first place? You told everyone it was layoffs, but now I'm wondering if that was just another lie. Bethany hesitated, her lips trembling. Finally, she admitted the truth. I got caught taking money from the register, she mumbled. Me and a couple of coworkers. We didn't think it was a big deal. Not a big deal? I repeated, my voice rising. You were stealing. Of course it was a big deal. They only fired me, she said defensively. The others got to keep their jobs. Maybe because they didn't have a record. I shot back. Or maybe because they didn't threaten their landlord like you did. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide. How do you know about that? She asked. I figured it out, I said. You've burned every bridge you've ever had, Bethany. And now you've dragged me into your mess. Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment, she looked like a child who had been caught misbehaving. But I wasn't done. You need to leave, I said again. And don't come back. The police will find you eventually, and when they do, you'll have nobody to blame but yourself. Later that evening, I got a call from my dad. He started the conversation the way he always did. by trying to guilt me into forgiving Bethany. Dana, can't we handle this as a family? He asked. She's your sister. She's also a thief, I replied. She stole from me, Dad. For my kids. And I won't just let that slide. She's had a hard time, he said weakly. So have I. I shot back. But I've never stolen from anyone. She made her choices, and now she has to face the consequences. He sighed heavily. I just hope you can find a way to work things out. We already have, I said. She's out of my life, and that's final. 2 days after Bethany showed up on my porch, things took an unexpected turn. It was mid-morning, and I was just finishing cleaning up the breakfast dishes when there was another knock at the door. My stomach sank, half expecting it to be Bethany again. When I opened it, 2 uniformed police officers stood there. Good morning, ma'am, one of them said. We're following up on the report you filed about your sister and her boyfriend. Come in, I said, stepping aside to let them in. The officers asked me to recap everything, even though I'd already provided a detailed statement and footage. I told them about the theft, the confrontation, and Bethany's shocking confession about the gun. When I mentioned the gun, one of the officers raised an eyebrow. Did she say what they planned to do with it? He asked. She said Ryan wanted it to threaten her former employer, I replied. She claims it wasn't her idea, but honestly, I don't trust anything she says anymore. The officer nodded, jotting something down in his notebook. We've located Bethany, he said. She's currently in custody at the station. She turned herself in late last night. I blinked, surprised. She turned herself in? Yes, ma'am. Apparently, she claimed she wanted to make things right. I scoffed, crossing my arms. That's rich. She only turned herself in because she knows she's cornered. The officer didn't comment, instead asking if I wanted to provide any additional evidence or details for their case. I handed over a USB drive with the security footage, which they thanked me for before leaving. That evening, I received a call from my dad. You know Bethany turned herself in, right? He asked, his voice heavy with disapproval. Yes, I know, I said bluntly. Dana, do you really think calling the police was necessary? She's your sister. You could have handled this without getting the law involved. I tried handling it, Dad. I snapped. I gave her a chance to pay me back. She didn't. I gave her a chance to leave peacefully. She didn't. She brought this on herself. But Mason, he started, his voice softening. Mason is safe, I interrupted. Safer than he's ever been with her. You're not even going to help her? He asked, incredulous. No, Dad. I'm not, I said firmly. She's had enough chances, and all she's done is hurt the people around her. It's time she faced the consequences of her actions. He sighed deeply, but I was done feeling guilty. The court process moved quickly, considering the amount of evidence against Bethany and Ryan. At her first hearing, I sat in the back of the courtroom, watching as she shuffled in, handcuffed and looking small. She glanced around the room, her eyes meeting mine briefly, but I didn't flinch. The prosecutor laid everything out, the footage of her and Ryan in my room, her confession to trying to find my gun, and testimony from her former employer about her history of theft. Bethany sat quietly, her head down, while the judge reviewed the evidence. Ryan's case was even worse. The prosecutor revealed that he had an extensive criminal record, including outstanding warrants for fraud and possession of stolen property. By the time sentencing came around, I already knew what to expect. Bethany received 18 months in jail with the possibility of parole after 12 months for good behavior. Ryan, on the other hand, was sentenced to 2.5 years due to his prior convictions. Watching them being led out of the courtroom, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was no satisfaction, no sense of victory, just relief. Relief that this chapter was finally coming to a close. The best news came a few weeks later. My friend Caroline, who had been caring for Mason since Bethany's arrest, filed for custody. The court didn't hesitate to grant it. Between Bethany's criminal record and the testimony from neighbors and family about Caroline's care, it was clear Mason was better off with her. I was relieved to know Mason would have stability, something Bethany could never provide. As for me, I focused on rebuilding. The money Bethany stole was gone, and there was no getting it back, but my kids didn't need to know that. I worked extra shifts, trimmed every unnecessary expense, and reached out to friends and neighbors for help. One afternoon, while I was sitting at the kitchen table wrapping small gifts I'd managed to afford, Matthew came over and hugged me tightly. "Mom, you don't have to work so hard," he said softly. I ruffled his hair and smiled. "I do, kiddo, because you're worth it." Christmas morning wasn't as extravagant as I'd originally planned, but it was still magical. The kids opened their presents with wide eyes and big smiles, and for the first time in weeks, the house felt warm again. I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about Bethany from time to time. Part of me wondered if she'd ever change, if prison would finally force her to take a hard look at her life. But I wasn't holding my breath. The experience taught me something important. Family doesn't mean sacrificing yourself for people who hurt you. It doesn't mean tolerating lies, manipulation, or betrayal. Sometimes, the best thing you can do for yourself and for them is to walk away. Bethany tried to take everything from me, but in the end, I still had what mattered most: my kids, my home, and my peace. And that was enough.